Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 51 of Office Hours. I'm Adam Coble. I am your temporary professor, here to answer 3 questions for you about game mastering. Go to www.adam-coble/office-hours, and you can fill in the form there and submit it. And I've just recently gone through the database, and I've cleared out a whole bunch of old questions that were already answered or multiple submitted, etc., etc. So I went over to the database and I cleared that all out. So if you submit a question now, the chances of me getting to it are much more quickly than much more quickly than before. So go and check that out. I've got 3 questions today. They run a wide gamut of interesting topics. But we've only got an hour, so let's stop goofing around and start answering some questions. Question the first.
Hi, Adam. My question has to do with how to GM for a group of players that have really different levels of experience with RPGs and with stories in general. I happen to GM for a group where some players have been playing RPGs for years and others are much newer. And it seems to come up when they're creating characters, and for example, some of the newer players will want to play through characters who are heroic knights because that's a classic story and they haven't actually had the chance to go through that. But the more experienced players look at that and say, oh god, not another game with heroic knights. And I want to try and balance that so everyone has fun, but I also don't want to deny the new people the chance to go through that kind of story if that's something they want to experience. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So this kind of problem, I think, is common in groups, regardless of what game you're playing. Varying levels of awareness of both setting and of story structure, those sorts of things. They run through most game groups and can cause a ton of frustration, especially when you're playing in a pre-established game world, right? Like whether you're exploring the Underdark in Faerun or flying around in X-Wings battling the Galactic Empire, the setting, and we'll start here and we'll work on the other thing in a second, but setting itself can carry massive expectations about what gameplay will be like. Those expectations lead us into character creation, in which we are demanded to create something that will fit, that will be a piece of a larger puzzle. But further complicating the setting issue is that even games set within the same universe might not be tonally or thematically similar, right? If you look at the canon of any given world or setting, you're going to find themes and expectations change even in the same medium, right? If someone says to you, I love Star Trek, and you say to them, hey, me too, maybe they like the more politically oriented drama of Deep Space Nine, whereas you're more of a lens flares and fistfights J.J. Abrams style of Star Trek fan. I mean, look at comic books. How many different ways have there been to depict just Gotham City alone within DC? So even if you're all, diehard Ed Greenwood fans, you're going to have to remember that everybody in the group potentially has a different idea about the kinds of fiction that they'd like to create. What further complicates the issue is that some games, like Dungeons & Dragons, come with a built-in idea of what role-playing even is, right? For some folks who have only a fleeting pop culture influenced idea of what role-playing games are like, might instinctively want to emulate the kind of play they see briefly in, say, Stranger Things or that episode of Community. They may watch roleplay or Critical Role and draw assumptions about how role-playing just works as a discipline. When you complicate things with murky rule sets that often claim any style of play is possible or any kind of character fits into this world, we have lots and lots of layers upon which to get our wires crossed, especially, as you say, when we mix and match levels of experience and expertise that go along with that. So let's begin by throwing out the idea, just discard the idea altogether, that more experienced folks somehow have got the right of way when it comes to establishing tone or theme in a game. Just because we've all seen 4 halflings, an elf, a dwarf, a Numenorian, a human, and a wizard go on an adventure a bunch of times, it doesn't immediately invalidate it, right? And by the same token, just because someone knows more about the setting you're going to be playing in, don't let them blunt force trauma their way into railroading the other players. One of the biggest flags that I look for in a player, so if I'm sitting down with a group of players I haven't played with before, or even folks I have been playing with forever, I look for this flag above and beyond almost all others. It's one of my most hated player pet peeves, is when someone is cruel to someone else's ideas. Seriously, if you ever sit down at the table with me and another player takes the risk to express a creative idea or desire, and your only response is to roll your eyes and scoff and tell them that it's boring or wrong, I will never want to play with you again. I legitimately have game groups I have quit because people in them have been like this. In the middle of a session, someone said, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? And someone else rolled their eyes and they were like, no, come on, that's dumb. That's a stupid idea. I did not play long with those folks. I think the point here is to be gentle with one another, right? Especially if someone is has less expertise in role playing, doesn't understand the setting as much. Someone is coming from a place of ignorance and you have knowledge and practice. Be kind, be gentle, and fucking listen when they speak, regardless of whether you know more than them or not. It's a really smart move for everyone at the table, and trying to work through that initial scoffing or like, well, actually, the Imperial Fang Squadron was composed of 12 TIE fighters, right? Taking that urge and doing something better with it isn't going to just help your group, but it's going to help diffuse that kind of innate gatekeeping that some nerds do. Because, you feel like you've earned the right to shove your glasses up your nose and tell everyone how many TIE fighters are in Fang Squadron. But that's not your job at the role-playing table, right? Your job is to, as a player, listen to what other people say and advocate for your own desire in that order. Now, I get that you may have particular ideas about the setting, or you have some things that you want, and it's okay to express that, but your responsibility is to the group at large, not to your own sense of nerd ego. And this can apply both to how much you know about a setting, how much you know about the rule set of a game, and just your general nerd cred overall. It's false cred. Do not just let it go. We'll talk a little bit about what you can do if you can't let that go at the end. So at the table during character creation, your job as a player, not the question asker's job, but a player's job is to talk about the kind of character they want to play and the sorts of narratives they hope will emerge from the game as a result. They're also going to need to gently adjust their expectations so they can facilitate space for the ideas and desires of others. And this is why I think that ultimately character creation is a part of gameplay and can't be done alone. Even in games that mechanically don't encourage the characters to have anything to do with one another. Mechanically, you can all sit at home with your player's handbooks and you can make Dungeons and Dragons characters. You can bring them to the table and say, bam, here we are. But I think you're doing a disservice to your game at large. We need to treat group character creation, and if you're doing it as a group, world creation, like a group activity that can only be done in play. Because even if the mechanisms don't encourage or enable it, you're making decisions about the instruments that you're going to be playing in this metaphorical band you're playing together, and you don't want someone to bring a sousaphone to your heavy metal outfit. Or, alternatively, metaphor, you don't want a table full of fruit salad at your potluck. One fruit salad is fine, but 5 fruit salads does not a potluck make. The GM's job during world and character creation is to advocate for the world you want to play in. If you're coming to the table with some notes about a world you're creating for the game, your job is to help guide players towards concepts and choices that support the narrative you're excited about for the world. If you've all agreed to play in an existing world, your job is to creative direct the group towards a harmonious understanding of that world. And that can be tricky. If folks have a mixed understanding, you might have to summarize it for them, right? Now, I know that if you're playing a Star Wars game, you might want to say, okay, watch all the Star Wars movies, then watch this miniseries, we'll read these books, and then you're ready for the game, right? But that demands so much homework. If anyone ever said that to me, if they were like, okay, we're going to play a fantasy game, and you have to read all of the Glenn Cook novels, you need to read The Black Company, then you need to read Conan issue 18 through 45. Then I also need you to watch 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, season 2 and season 4. Okay, and that's what I'm basing my campaign on. I would be like, ain't nobody got time for that shit. I can't do that. So if you, as the GM, if you really want to play in an existing world that not everybody is going to get to know, you need to work with the players that do already know that world, sit down and create a primer, right? Create a primer for what the players will need to know. Here's a picture of what an elf looks like. Here's some elf stuff. Here's how magic works. Make a little slideshow. It's actually kind of fun. I've done this before. If you have the time. If you don't have time, you can't expect people to know these things about your world. At the very least, summarize for people, right? We're playing Star Wars. Okay, so is it Star Wars like the Clone Wars cartoon, like swashbuckling Jedi fighting separatists, or is it more like, Han and Chewie and scum and villainy were smugglers or bounty hunters? What parts of Star Wars are you, the GM, most interested in? Bring that to the table in a way that you can teach your players. The players will buy into and build on your concept, and it'll help create a stronger party and game dynamic if you can be the firm anchor for the campaign. Ultimately, when you do that, when you bring that firm choice to the table, your players have 3 choices. They can influence your creative direction to better fit their character. So, try to convince the GM that it's okay to play a secret, hidden, last of the sorcerers kind of character in a setting where sorcery is illegal. Or they can buy in. They can make a character that already fits, right? A wizard hunter, ready to spill the blood of illegal witches. Or they can just sit this campaign out, right? I really wanted to play a wizard in the next role-playing game I played, and if you guys are playing a game with no wizards, I guess it's cool. The game's not for me. I'm gonna sit it out. Let me know when you're done this campaign, or if you decided to change directions, right? Essentially, what we're looking at here is a larger group meta process that really shouldn't fall on the GM, right? These responsibilities exist, but they're not, unlike, say, rules calls, your responsibility is the game master to enforce. As the GM, you're one player amid many, but you're often the one seen as being in the center of things, right? You've got an idea for a campaign you want to run. Your players want to be part of that, and to do so, they have to get in alignment with your vision. Now, you're all going to have to work together, collaborating on this process, and nobody ought to be so pig-headed as to be unwavering, but it's cool to stick to your guns, too, right? You know these folks better than I do, and it sounds to me like you're doing that thing. You're being a Canadian game master here, and you're doing that thing where you're being too polite to be aggressive enough to help, right? You told me player group A wants to play Noble Knights. Player group B is rolling their eyes and sighing at having to be Noble Knights again. What do you want? Stop being so fucking Canadian about it and be like, yo, I want this. And then the players will have to gravitate around your circle because you have say as well. And you have say that gives them context. And if you're too polite and too gentle with your players about your idea for the game, they won't have context to make characters. So in a way, by being gentle with them and by letting them have the space to just do whatever they want, you're not giving them the constraints that they need. Sometimes your players need to be restrained to be creative. So think about ways you can do that. The thing here is that you know these people better than I do, and you're gonna want to use your GMing skills to get the most out of this process, right? It might be that your more experienced players don't want to play Honorable Knights, and the new players only want to play that, and that's fine. Playing an RPG isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about creating something new and exciting together. And compromise, and by compromise I mean not doing something grudgingly because you have to, but choosing to change what you desire so that it incorporates more space for other people's ideas. Compromise is an important factor for everyone. So The thing here is that you have a vision, bring it to the table, let it get altered, but use that to center your whole game. Someone might want to play an honorable knight. Everyone else can play other things. It's on you to make all that work together if you want to. And if you don't, it's fine. I've been thinking about this a ton since we just finished. As of the 13th, the recording of this episode, we just finished recording 8 hours of world building and character creation for Series 3 of Roll20 Presents The Burning Wheel, and it was all about this process. This whole thing is very much like front of mind for me. I think that Luke and company at Burning Wheel do a very good job setting up for this, both with the core book and the commentary and the codex, by way of the mechanistic processes of character creation. You build the world together, but the GM has to have a firm idea of what's going on in the setting so the players can build around it, right? So like I came to the table with this idea that we are in this patriarchal Western European style fantasy setting. I said straight up, I'm not really interested in elves, orcs, dwarves, whatever. I would like to cut them out. So make your characters from the Mannish life paths. The beginning of the game will center around the idea that the High Patriarch has declared that God is dead. The entire society's basis has now been removed. Chaos is going to ensue. We're playing an intrigue game. Make characters that can survive and thrive in that chaos. And if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't brought that to the table, then we wouldn't have been able to make characters at all. And Burning Wheel demands that. So, even if you're not ready to check out the whole game, find some time to watch the character creation stuff. I think that Blue Jay, Elf, Andrew, and Dave all do a great job of both bringing their own agenda to the table, the kinds of characters that they wanted, trying to help move my needle in various directions, but then also making room for each other's character ideas and building on that. I think it's a great example of character creation and world building, and we really gave it a lot of time, right? That's why it took us 8 hours. Your game may not require that much time, but take a look. That's my example of show, not tell. Ultimately, I think if anyone is really not into what's getting put out there for the game, whether it's the players are not really digging the context for their characters, the other characters are making it something they're not interested in, they really can't find a way to get hype about it. It's fine. They're probably better off joining a different game anyhow, and that's okay. They don't have to be a part of this game. There can be other campaigns.
There are many games which award XP for role-playing or just being at a session. XP for role-playing is not always guaranteed because there are players who feel more comfortable playing out of character, while XP for just being present at a game really does not stimulate anything, and, players could go on their phones for the entire 3 hours and still receive XP. With all of that in mind, my question is, what should XP be rewarded for, and is there a method that can be applied to most games? For example, the method like in Dungeon World, where you award XP for a failed roll. Thank you very much.
This question really got me thinking, and I feel like when I came to the end of my notes for this question, I had more like unanswered bits than I did answers. And I'm going to try to talk about some of the things that I thought about, but this is a fantastic question and fascinating to think about. So ultimately what Ted is asking is, what should we have as a reward to the players in every role-playing game that exists? What XP should be rewarded? Is it possible to apply an XP model to every role-playing game out there? And if so, what should we reward XP for? So reward structures of an RPG are so crucially important to gameplay, right? RPG reward structures pair with character activity mechanisms to tell the people who play the game what that game is meant to be about. In Dungeons and Dragons, the games give us swords and spells and armor, and then we're told we're going to be rewarded with XP if we murder fuck our way through the dungeon and out to glory. With those two things in hand, we can navigate the intentions of the people who design these games. Now, I'm of the mind that a game should reward character activity with character reward and player activity with player reward. I don't really believe in cross-pollination. I don't think characters should get better when players behave a certain way. And I don't think I've ever seen this happen, but I don't think that player-only rewards should be gained by the character's behavior. But let me try to unpack that. So, if my character, as a philosophically separated entity from myself, achieves their goal in a game, they should be rewarded with whatever the proper currency for advancement that the game relies on. However, these waters begin to muddy when we look at reward structures for things like role-playing or player behavior, right? Many games give out rewards for playing one's character. This is what we call rewards for role-playing. And they act as incentives to play the game a certain way, extent of our characters themselves. For example, highlighting a stat in Apocalypse World incentivizes the player to navigate towards scenes and moments in which that stat can be rolled. It influences the way that we play the character if we desire the rewards of the game, which of course we do because it's a game. Our character is rewarded for the way we play them. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, right? I am encouraged by my hot and hard highlight to be hard and hot. This is a session in which my character is going to flirt, manipulate, punch, and shoot their way through their problems, as opposed to, say, avoiding them or getting weird, right? Because I'm being incentivized by my fellow players and by the game to improve my character by my own behavior. In Blades in the Dark, we are rewarded XP for making desperate rolls, which John includes in Blades to create a sense of fictional bravery, right? Characters taking big risks is fun and interesting. The dice results are more fun when you're doing desperate actions. If you're rewarded for desperate actions, you're more likely to do them more often. We're rewarded for playing our character in a certain illustrative way as well, right? Which is incentivizing us to role play in a particular way so that our characters can come to the fore and we can learn about them. In Burning Wheel, the reward structure is wide and deep and kind of intense, but the simplified version of that in Mouse Guard is basically just play your character as your belief, instinct, and goal indicate you ought to, plus some very player-to-player level rewards for very gamey stuff, right? MVP, for example. The rewards that we get out of a role-playing game tend to be of two sorts. We're either rewarded with further influence or advancement. In the form of experience points, we're given simple forward momentum advancement, right? The characters get better by doing things that XP is given for, or with XP. In Blades, we're charging up a moment of choice where we get to advance a stat or take a move. When we look at Fate and Persona in Mouse Guard, the characters are entirely bypassed. These are player-level rewards for player behavior. We're given extra dice, the chance to re-roll. The reward structure in Mouse Guard doesn't touch the character because it's an influence reward, right? It lets the player decide which roles are most important, and in the end gives you more opportunity as a player to say what's true in the narrative when those moments come up. If I'm saving my Persona points for a big conflict, it's because the conflict matters to me as a player, and likely, though not intrinsically, the character. You can blow your Persona on whatever you want, but your character will never know that they have had Persona spent on them, right? As a philosophical entity, Persona flows into the scene more than it flows into the character themselves. If you want to see a great example of things that matter to the player but might not matter to the character in the same way, look at a character sheet for Dogs in the Vineyard. The way dice are assigned in that game really leans on what the player cares about. So I suppose what we should do when we start to talk about rewards generally at all in role-playing games is understand who is being rewarded, right? Now, this crosses over a little bit into the idea of the metagame and stances. I think this is a nuanced and complicated thing that we're not going to be able to really delve to the bottom of in a few minutes. But let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because I think it's a system that we're all more or less familiar with. I'm going to talk about 5e because I think it's the first D&D to like really mix up the reward systems. But we're going to talk about influence rewards and advancement rewards. We're going to talk about player rewards versus rewards for characters. All right. So in Dungeons and Dragons, the 3 rewards are gold, advantage, and experience points. So gold is a reward that exists only in the fiction. It's a reward that is generally secondary to the other 2 rewards, though it remains a mechanical element of play, right? It does affect you mechanically. Characters are rewarded with gold, under which I also lump things like gems, gear, magic items, the physical stuff of reward in play, for making smart decisions about risks, right? They get gold for choosing to undertake particular quests, to fight particular monsters, etc. They can get an idea of the gold that they might be rewarded by doing those things. You can see a great example of a suffering gold reward economy in the first parts of Court of Swords, right? The players continually back out of dangerous quests right before an opportunity for gold. So this is a player level reward, GM level reward. If I ever play Dungeons and Dragons where a GM rewards players gold for their characters for doing anything outside of character play, like bringing pizza, like, oh, you brought pizza to the table, here's 100 gold for your character. That DM does not understand how reward structures work in a game, and that's a red flag for me, right? So in Dungeons and Dragons, the second form of reward is in many ways gold or treasure's inverse. It's a purely ephemeral award the character will never realize that they have, and it's granted to the character for player level behavior, right? Advantage, ostensibly, is given out by the game master when the players meet the condition of their various sundry role-playing tags, right? When they RP their character in a way that illustrates or at least adheres to the claims on the character sheet. This is the carrot to earlier editions. Don't play your character's alignment, you get the stick, right? So this advantage can then be exchanged for influence over mechanical elements of the game that the player cares about. You can convert your role-playing labor into narrative payout whenever you choose. So it's a player level reward. It's given by the GM as a player to another player for watching them play their character, but it bypasses the character completely. The third form of reward, experience points, is a more complex, bigger, and more certainly the most commonly understood form of reward, right? Experience points straddles a bit of a line because by way of increasing capabilities, it does exist in fiction. Experience points, like a character doesn't know they have XP, right? But a 5th level wizard in the world is categorically more and differently talented than a 1st level wizard. Even if both wizards in fiction wouldn't be able to explain why in the same way that we could, right? Like a 1st level character cannot chart in the same way their increase in levels, but they're going to understand that they're not as good as a 5th or a 10th level wizard. XP is rewarded for overcoming challenges, which really means engaging the mechanics in a specifically skilled way so as to overcome foes, puzzles, or traps, and generally translates as fucking murder your enemies before they murder you. This reward is purely advancement style and affects the fictional construct of the character, but is also a reward for the players for understanding the mechanisms of the game. Because without that understanding, eventually the characters will enter sufficiently tactically challenging situations as to kill their characters outright. Though without engaging the mechanisms of the game, the players can't gain XP for their characters. So there's, again, this thing, like, as a GM, do you reward experience points for out-of-fiction activity because it fundamentally changes the fiction, right? So here's the thing, right? I am a Throndir half-elven, I am a mighty ranger of 2nd level, and I have just defeated a pack of kobolds. And in the aftermath of the battle, I take a moment, a short rest, if you will, sit my butt down upon a log and survey the enemies I had slain. Yes, I think to myself, I am becoming a braver, stronger warrior. And as a result, my character has gained some experience. Maybe I gained a level, right? Now, think about it this way. Throndir has done nothing for about a week. We've been traveling from Bucksburg to Thornton, and nothing has happened. But suddenly, Throndir is level 2. But whence? Whence this new information? Oh, it's because our game master gave Throndir's player 1,000 experience because he brought snacks for the table. Now, D&D doesn't have this really fundamental fiction-first play style, but that stuff fucks with me. Why is my character getting better because I'm doing things in play, but not at the table? And so this is where we get to this peeve under which we see reward structures, which I loathe, that apply a reward to players' characters purely for the performance or attendance and ignore the mechanisms of the game altogether. Frankly, if you can play an entire session of a game, never engage the game's mechanisms, and have the game reward you for it, that game might as well just not exist at all. And in fact, is encouraging you not to play it. But, as you might say, award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World has reward triggers that don't require a roll, right? Alignment and group question XP triggers don't require you roll dice to get them. And to that I say, it's impossible to play Powered by the Apocalypse games in good faith without ever triggering a move. The mechanisms are so inherent to the fiction that it's nearly impossible not to trigger them. Unless you're actively describing your character doing nothing, chances are pretty good a move will occur and you can earn alignment and question the triggers. But that's a fundamental aspect of the Powered by the Apocalypse games. So let's go all the way back and actually answer your question, Ted. You asked me, what should XP be rewarded for? And the answer, of course, is what do you want the players to do while playing? What do you want to reward them for at a player and at a character level? I hate 1 XP for showing up rewards because they don't answer that at all, except to say they get XP for coming, which to me feels like a given. You don't get a reward for breathing air and drinking water, you just don't die. Any reward that hinges on the continued requirements of play annoys me, and I don't fucking understand them. I'm going to level a slight criticism at the Sprawl for this. I'm enjoying the Sprawl. We've been playing it for a while. I'm having fun. But in the Sprawl, you custom create a set of triggers for XP gain during a mission, right? So when the players infiltrate the facility, they mark XP. When the players plant the bomb, they mark XP. When the players escape the facility, they mark XP. But the first flag, the very first flag is when they accept the mission, mark XP. But the game can't continue unless they do that. And I'm not sure what the goal is there, because it feels very much like an XP for showing up situation. It is a carrot dangled in front of someone who is starving. We don't want to encourage them to chase the carrot. We just want to give them the carrot so they don't die, so that we can have a game. So that's the thing, right? A game's reward structure will tell you what you ought to be doing as a player or a GM, and you can be as straightforward about this or as obtuse as you like. The goal here is to offer the carrot to the player to behave a certain way. In character or out, right? It's fundamental to the economy of whatever game you're playing. I often tell people to be wary about hacking experience or other reward systems in the games they play because they can so dramatically alter the play of those games. I can acknowledge that people play games for other less intrinsic rewards, but we can't design outside that. If you show up at the table because you want to do funny voices and you want to amuse your friends and you don't actually care about playing the game, you're not the target for this kind of advice anyway. I guess I don't believe in universal generalized reward structures. I don't think that there's any specific thing that I would want every person to do at every game that isn't related to or that is related to that game. The kinds of things, to me, that feel universal, like listening to the other players, incorporating other players' ideas into your narrative, being respectful. These feel like human behaviors, not gameplay ones. Now, I suppose you could mechanize that stuff, but I would feel personally supremely patronized if a game gave me a little in-character like reward cookie every time I did something decent, like used someone's pronouns respectfully. That shit feels like a given. Just like showing up for the session shouldn't be rewarded with experience. It's necessity of play. You have to be there. So I guess the answer to your question is no. Right? Every game ought to offer the right incentives for its own narrative intentions, whatever they may be, and the player behaviors to get you there. How does your favorite game reward players? Right? Think about your favorite game. Think about its reward structure. Can you think of any games that do weird things with character rewards? What games do you play that reward players and not characters? What are those games like at the table? How do the reward structures of the games that you like change the way you play them? In Dungeons & Dragons, if you only earned experience every 5 sessions and you earned the same amount of experience no matter what you did, would you continue to play the same way? How do the experience systems in the games that you play pair up with the tools that your characters have for solving problems? Do they pair up? Do you get rewarded experience for doing the things your characters are capable of doing? Or is it separate from that? I think I have more questions about how XP works than I have answers. But to try to answer your question at least, I think what you want to think about here, not so much is, can I reward everyone for doing great things, but can I encourage my players to do great things by using the experience system of the game that we're already playing? And if you can't, your game is probably not very good at rewarding people. That's my thought on it, anyway.
Howdy, Adam. I like to do voices when I play characters, especially when I GM. I do my best to be respectful when I replicate a real and current accent, but I sometimes just tend to pass them off as fictional when I feel like it's not authentic. Where do you think the line should be drawn? Specifically, when playing a character that is dissimilar to myself, whether by race, nationality, sex, gender, etc., how do I ensure that any accents or behaviors that I exhibit are respectful, while still being entertaining when intended?
So I'm like hot dog salesman here. As someone who really enjoys doing unique in-character voices, I think this is a really great question, but I don't know that I'm going to have the definitive answer for you and for everyone. When we, as game masters, portray characters who are different than we are, we take on a new culture, gender, or sometimes even species, and that's a big deal. Our venue for expressing these things, these different cultures and genders that we take on, is vocal, above and beyond all else. The way we inflect our voice can make or break the character. Often, to differentiate one character from another, or just differentiate them from our own distinct voice, we do accents. We add speech mannerisms, throw in a lisp or affectation, and build the character around that. I know that Max, Gassy Mexican, for example, when he makes a D&D character, he does the voice first, then builds the character around it. So Berg's deep, angry rumble came from Max's imagination without a character, and then he built and wrapped Berg around that voice. And some of the most memorable characters from the roleplay shows are born from their voices, right? I know that Berg and Higgins and Pi and Dr. Grigori are all characters whose voices are a huge part of why they're so popular and fun to watch. But since we're limited human beings and not just engines of perfect infinite mimicry, sometimes we end up in a position where we're just emulating an existing voice. And that's where we need to start to be careful. So there are a few things that I think about when I start doing an accent. I think about whether I'm performing a voice that already belongs to someone or not, right? Am I just saying things in a way that is entirely made up, or am I aping some other existing culture or people that exist in the world, right? And if I am, I have to take a minute to think about the ways in which my portrayal of that accent, whether the person I'm playing is someone from a real culture or a fantasy culture with a matching accent, how does that accent reflect on the people who sound like the voice that I'm doing, right? Part of this is recognizing patterns and deciding when and how to work with or around those patterns. So for me, for example, a habit or a pattern that I have is I tend to equate Russian-sounding accents with like revolutionaries, right? There's this image of comradely struggle and the type of voice that gets well cemented in my head, right? My Russian accent tends towards the Zangiefs. It tends towards the Zaryas. It tends towards this slightly cartoonish kind of pop culture in the 80s, right? Russians. And the characters that go with it tend to take on that kind of attitude or behavior. Sometimes I can work around or ignore it. Other times I tend to just go with it. And I try to do so as respectfully as possible. You know, the characters that I play, I try to make them more than just their voice politics. I have to remember, though, that I am reinforcing a stereotype when I choose to make a group of halfling mine workers uniting under a collectivist leader sound like a little bit Eastern European. I'm making a choice, and I'm reinforcing a stereotype. That's a thing that I have to recognize that I'm doing. As the players get to know those characters better, they will realize they're not just that. But that's the trick, right? Is that characters will not always get to that depth. So you have to remember what you're doing. The thing is that real people speak in a variation of the voice that I'm emulating. And while I can attempt to do it justice first by not making a mockery of it, right? By not overblowing it, by not making it a joke. Secondly, I can try to do it justice by doing it as accurately as I can, right? It isn't my voice and I'm taking a risk. And the closer I can get to that accent, the less it's going to seem like I am an outsider making fun of people who sound that way. So generally, as these things go, I tend to be more careful and more wary and honestly just more concerned about these sorts of things. The more marginalized I perceive the people whose voice I'm using is to my own, right? My normal speaking voice is a highly accepted kind of accent. My English is accented in a way that so is, you know, many accents that people are given access to in the media. The sound of an English-speaking male voice is very, very high on the sort of privileged list. And I just have to be aware that there are elements of danger in seeming like I'm mocking someone whose accent shows them to be in a position of less privilege than I have. Let me give you an example. Let me talk about Cantor Hague for a second. So Cantor Hague is a character that I have that I play in Blades in the Dark. He's explicitly described as being a sort of parentless corner boy. He is a drug dealer. He's violent. He cares very much about his rep on the street. So many of the characters that inspire the culture that I imagine Cantor coming from are black. And this is because the media I absorb that portrays tough young men in dangerous urban drug-related situations writes and casts black men in those parts. And in many ways, Cantor's story borrows from stories of blackness that I have watched or listened to and read. But Cantor is a white guy, or the Duskwall equivalent of a white guy, right? And so am I. I am also white. I'm a white person playing a white character who is inspired by a lot of black narrative. So I actively have to work hard not to appropriate speech patterns and language from like African American vernacular English when I portray him. I try to keep on my toes as much as possible and be vigilant that I'm not just being an appropriative piece of shit. I'm sure I don't do a perfect job, but I'm hoping that if someone called me out on it or asked me to change, I would stop. I would. I know I would. I want this character to be his own thing, informed by the media that I absorb and like, but I don't want to add to... This is the thing. I would rather he were Ziggy from season 2 of The Wire than, say, White Mike. Cantor is not White Mike. I have to spend a lot of energy trying not to be White Mike. So this kind of thing is why I cringe and recoil a little bit when, say, like, straight dudes do a gay voice. These kinds of things can be a form of punching down. You are turning an indicator of someone's marginalization into a joke or a sort of one-trick characterization, and it reduces those characters to their gay voice, especially with NPCs. With PCs, we have tons of time to learn about them, but with NPCs, if the only thing you get is the like, oh, honey, it's dangerous because you are stereotyping that character. We have this responsibility as game masters to tone that down or play it in a way that doesn't show these characters as one-dimensional, especially if those one dimensions only reflect an existing cultural problem, right? Now, I think it's certainly possible for a straight guy to play a character who is a gay man that has an effeminate-sounding voice in that way, because I think that is a thing. I'm not an expert on vocal tendencies of predominantly straight homosexual men. But the thing is, if you want to play a character that's like that, that's your fucking job. Go and research it. Read about that, right? Now, I've said this 100 times, but research and learning is a great thing to do in your GM. Even if it doesn't help your game, learning is going to make you a more interesting person, right? So when I start a game and I get it in my head, I want to include a culture either inspired by an existing one or adjacent to an existing one, I will read and research and learn as much as I can about it. And that includes listening to the language, and maybe most importantly, listening to people with that accent of that language speak English. Because accents are amazing. They're beautiful, and they're cool, and they sound strange and weird and interesting, and I love hearing English spoken with so many variable inflections. Something that I do is just listen to as many folks speak in that accent as I can. People for whom English is a second language, primary sourcing is very important. If you're just mimicking an accent that's a mimicry of another accent that isn't as well researched, you're not doing a great job, right? Like, if I want to have a character that has an Indian accent, I'm not going to fucking go watch, I don't know, Short Circuit, right? I'm not going to watch Peter Sellers, right? If I can manage, and I often can't, I'll ask someone. I've had fans pronounce things for me in Vietnamese and Chinese. I've had them pronounce things in Hungarian so that I can better understand how to say the words I've been trying to and failing to say. Ultimately, though, I think it's not about being defensive or letting yourself be lax. Even if I have a character voice that I feel good about or practiced at, and I think it's not offensive, but someone else with that accent or from that place tells me otherwise, and that's their experience, I'd rather just retire it, right? I would be happy to say, so that accent I was doing for this character, I'm not feeling as comfortable about it as I was before. You can imagine that they sound like that if you want, but I'm not going to keep performing that. I'm not going to keep performing that accent. We have to be able to trust our players to understand that even if we wish we could make all the voices in the world, they can imagine the accent for whatever reason, right? Learn vocabulary for the way people speak. Say things like, when this character is speaking, imagine her voice with a deep huskiness that feels like opium smoke and secrets. Get creative about the way you describe how they speak, but don't expect that you can make your voice do a perfect job of what's in your head. Novelists have been doing this for ages, and if you can't do an accent well, or you feel like the accent is weird or disrespectful, just say so. It's fine. I have loads of accents I can't do. But if I say to someone, he has a French accent, but not France French, like someone from the Congo might have, then the players and the audience can look it up. So try your best, do your research, and if someone tells you you're being hurtful, stop and reevaluate, right? Do it a different way. Describe the accent instead of invoking it directly. It's not giving up or failing when you make a choice not to do something that's hurting somebody. These lines aren't clear, right? But you can get a handle on your own way of looking at things. Think about how you generally portray characters, right? Do you always use Southern accents to show that a character is foolish? Do you always switch to an English accent to show wealth or class? This is a media problem, right? How many English accented ancient Romans have we seen in films that becomes a game mastering problem? Scope out your NPCs, look for your correlative cultural stuff and examine it for problematic ideas. And don't fret about it. Voice is just one thing that can make an NPC pop. Even if you don't make a cool accent for them, everyone has other vocal stuff that you can focus on. Try making a character speak at a different pace than usual, right? Go slow. Talk more quickly than usual. Pick some words that this character loves to use and then use them all the time. God knows that everyone that we know has that, right? Everybody that you know has words they use that are just for them. And you can pick that up. And like I say things that my friends say. My friends pick up things that I say because that's just how language works. So pick some stuff that your character likes to say. Your character likes to say indubitably all the time. Go for it. Rock and roll. Your character speak slowly and forget words. If you ever want to see a person who has excellent pause cadence, watch William Gibson speak about anything, right? He talks quite slowly, and he does these long pauses where he just kind of rubs his face. And everyone around him is silent during those pauses. Like he fills that silence with face rubbing. So I think you're already on the path here, right? You know, you're asking and you're thinking about it. And there's no way I can think of to be perfect about this, but practice and care is a great place to start. I would suggest as homework to, like I said, go look up a bunch of accents, right? Learn different accents, but also listen to characters in your favorite TV shows or movies and make note of the way that they speak, not just the accent that they speak in, but the ways they supplement their speech, and then incorporate that into your characters. Because I think that's really going to make their performance powerful. This has been episode 51 of Office Hours, a call-in Game Master advice show. If you would like to call in and get some Game Master advice, you can do so at www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. I'm glad you came. I hope you learned something. And we will see you next week for episode 52. Bye, everybody.